Greetings, programs. We have a very, very special episode, bonus episode, if you will, of the Nerd Cave Retro Show. I am here with Mr. Ash Nicholls from Art of Play Games. And he got a hold of us a couple of weeks ago and told us about this new project they're working on. It's why don't you tell everybody? Say hi, Mr. Ash.
Hello, everyone out there.
It's a
I'm
little
Ash.
early. It's a little early in the morning for him. He's in Australia and I'm in America, so he's it's 11 a.m. where he is. And but tell everybody a little bit about the project you guys have been working on with Lady Death and the new
Yeah.
retro style game you guys are working on.
hmm Yeah, so we're a small studio based out of Melbourne, Australia, and in 2020 we picked up the license for the Phantom, which isn't huge in the US, but certainly has a big following around the world. And one of the artists that I brought on to work on that particular game was Anthony Spay, and he was also a cover artist for Lady Death. And so about halfway through production on the Phantom, which is kind of where we're at this stage, he said, I'd like to introduce you to Brian Pulido over at Coffin Comics. Because he's been talking about doing a game, and Lady Death's been around since the mid '90s, so it's about time there was something happening in the game sphere. So we had a really good chat online, and we prepared a pitch deck for him, and spent a little bit of time working it through with him, and then late last year we flew out to Phoenix, both Anthony and myself, and we sat down with Brian for a good 3 days in his headquarters and laid down the foundation for what is now Lady Death Demonicron, which is a 2D side-scrolling beat 'em up in the vein of Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, Mortal Kombat. So very 90s, very gratuitous, lots of skin, lots of blood, lots
As
of
it should
swords.
be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the big things that Brian and I had in common was we both kind of thought everything cool kind of came to an end in the 90s.
Yeah,
We're
I
both
kind
kind
of
of stuck in the
agree.
90s. Yeah. So and I've got a little boy now, and my gaming tastes have kind of changed since I've had less time. I've been going back and playing a lot more of the retro games. Always been a huge fan of retro games, especially the classic Konami and Capcom beat 'em ups of that particular era. But I've been going before sort of the pandemic, I was starting to go back into those games a lot more. So anyway, talking to Brian, it kind of just made sense to move the game into that kind of era and pretend like we're making a game in the 90s, but we're making it now. So, our approach to the game is let's give it the 90s feel, but also make it feel like it's a comic book. You're playing the comic book. So, another sort of little bit of a bugbear of mine of recent is games that are produced all in 3D and they slap on a cell shader and call it comic book inspired.
Hmm.
Um, we wanted a real hand-drawn approach, a real feel to it that, like, if you turned the page on a comic, this game would feel like you've jumped into the cells,
Yeah.
into the pages. So that's the kind of approach we gave it. But heaps of blood, heaps of gore. I mean, between Brian, Mike McLean, and myself and Anthony, we wrote the story in about 3 days and pieced it all together, and we kind of left feeling really, really good about it. Actually, it was quite an inspirational few days for us, especially after COVID and being locked up. And
Hmm.
um, from our background, doing a lot of PG and G rated games for SpongeBob and Ninja Turtles and things like that, it was good just to sit in a room with some absolute crazy maniacs and talk about blood and gore for 3 days. So we were super pumped about it. Then I flew back to Phoenix in February of this year to attend Swornfest, which was, Lady Death's Universe Comic Con. Um, 600 people come to Phoenix, and it's just the hardcore Lady Death fans, and that's where we made the big announcement. And we're already into pre-production at that stage, but we made the announcement to the fans, and then officially we launched on Kickstarter on the 24th of April this year, which was really aimed at the fans to give the fans what they want, get some integration with the fans. They can have their names and their faces in the game and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of where we're at. But the core focus of the games is steeped in 90s nostalgia. It's going to be all hand drawn, frame by frame animation, so it's going to feel gritty. It's going to look awesome, and there's going to be so much blood and guts. And Lady Death's kind of the anti-hero character, so she fights in a way that you don't expect, stomping on testicles, spitting on people. So, it's going to be awesome. I mean, if you can remember going to the arcade parlor or the arcade centers back in the 90s, and they would have the red velvet curtains around some of the arcade machines that they deemed were too sort of risque.
Yeah.
Um, House of the Dead was one of them for us here in Australia. Mortal Kombat, the original Mortal Kombat did for a little while until that kind of whole thing blew over. But that's the kind of feel we're going for here. We want people to be kind of, oh, wow, that's a little bit crazy.
So, why do you think it is that it's taken so long to have Lady Death kind of jump out of the comic book arena into more of a different types of media like video games, and why hasn't there been a movie or a television series or at least an anime at this
There
point?
was actually an anime movie that came out in the early 2000s. um, and it did pretty well, but it was kind of a direct to
Mhm.
DVD sort of thing. And it was more of an outside sort of thing. This project is more of a collaboration with the Coffin Comic team. So I feel like what we're doing, it just happened at the right time. I think if you look at the lifespan of comics in general between sort of 95 and now, there was that giant dip there for a while where the whole industry kind of seemed to have just, shrunk
Yeah.
significantly. And then there was the resurgence, and I think Brian and his team have found a nice foothold with the direct to consumer type approach through Kickstarter, through crowdfunding, through their own online store. And that's given them finally the time that they need to start thinking about how they would get the character out into different medium. Prior to that, it's all about how do we just keep the franchise alive through the comics.
Mhm.
And I think that's given them the space they need now to sort of approach people like myself and say, hey, what do you think about this? There's also been a Lady Death board game that came out, I think not last year, the year before, perhaps. But very, very small attention has been focused on the digital sphere up until now. Uh, you know, there's always been plenty of action figures and statues and art books and the comics themselves. But I think Brian and his team realized that now they have this a little bit of breathing room, they can actually reach out to vendors like ourselves and sort of form collaborations.
Well, it looks amazing. I mean, to if you go to the Kickstarter, and I'll put all these links in the show notes and everything. But if you go to
Awesome.
Kickstarter, you see the teaser trailer. There's still shots from the game, and it looks incredible. I can't wait
Thank you.
to get my hands on this thing and see what it really plays like. And I'm excited. Like I actually went in my comics here. Yeah, I just wanted to show you that. I do have
Ah, nice.
some Lady Death comics here. I was a huge fan back in the '90s. I even have the Wizard One Half special here from
That's awesome.
back in the day. So I'm
That Wizard special, I was working in a comic book store in 1995 in a little like town, rural town in Australia that only had one comic book store. It only lasted 3 years. But I remember when I first saw Lady Death, I think to myself, holy crap, this is like it that and Spawn, that they both sort of surface at the same time.
yeah.
Those two brands were really like the underdogs and they were making like they were just everyone who was reading comics was reading those because it was like cool. It was bringing cool back
Hmm.
into comics, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it was a good time.
Well, it definitely has that, that underground cool feel to it, especially if you were around in the 90s, like comic books were everything back in the 90s. We didn't have comic book movies, so we had the comics themselves, and it was such a huge resurgence of comics and especially indie
Yeah,
comics. Like, I kind of put Lady Death in the same kind of category as like Hellboy and
yeah,
things like
100%.
Sandman, things like that. And
Yeah.
with Spawn, coming out with another movie now, I think that maybe it's time for the underground comics to have a little time in the sun. And I'm kind of hoping that this game does that for Lady Death. Like I really think Lady Death needs to have some more attention put on that property.
100%. And when we first had our meeting with Brian and his team, that was definitely a directive between us because we wanted to see Lady Death in the hands of more of the mainstream gaming community and bring them into the fold, so to speak. So that's definitely on our agenda. It's difficult when you're creating a game and no one has seen anything digital for a property for a long time. There's a lot of hesitation and skepticism. Uh, but because this is a collaboration and because Brian has seen our work with the Phantom and he knows the angle we're coming from, um, and everything we're doing, we're running by them, both from a lore perspective and from a visual perspective as well. It's really going to feel like, we haven't just bought the license from them and done a
Mhm.
runner with it and just did whatever we wanted to do with it. It is a collaboration.
Yeah, and the fact that he's writing with you guys on the story and everything for the game, that's really exciting.
Yeah, and it's canon too, man. So, yeah, what this won't at this stage that the game won't have a comic book counterpart, so you will have to play the game to see this part of Lady Death's story,
Hmm.
which we think is kind of cool. That's the kind of way it
Yeah.
should be. Um, it's cool to jump onto a game to see a different stage of the story, and then go back to your comics if you want to. I think that's perfectly fine in this day and age of cross media. Of course, people who don't play the game are not going to miss out. It's not going to be
Yeah.
like a crucial part of the story, but at least it will be, an official part of the story.
And I did want to say, I definitely want to tell you congratulations on the Kickstarter because you guys have blown past the goal that you guys had set. So there's definitely love for Lady Death out there.
100%. And the fans are awesome. I met probably 500 of the most hardcore, awesome people at Swarmfest back in February. And that was really the pivotal point for us because we could have gone either way on the project. We could have just said, okay, we've invested all this time, but let's shelve it for now. But the fan base were really behind it. We ran panels, we took questions from people. We kind of got a good feel for the love that was out there for the game. And there is a certain section of the Lady Death audience that are older and they may not be that interested in it. But there's certainly a lot of people out there that are getting more into this genre of gaming, and I'm hoping that the genre of gaming will then translate into people appreciating the character more because I think that's really important.
Well, it seems like it's already kind of, with that solid fan base, this thing has the potential to really do gangbusters. And is there a talk of maybe doing a sequel or keeping the, like sequels coming after this one
Oh,
comes out?
definitely. We'd love to create a Lady Death universe of games for sure. And some stretch goals in the project haven't been met yet, which would introduce new characters into the game. So we'll be looking at potentially, if there is enough interest for characters like Hal Lich, to bring them either into their own game or to have a secondary funding round, early next year to try and get more characters into this game.
What about
Um,
Evil Ernie?
because
Because
we're doing everything hand drawn frame by frame, it's not easy for us just to drop in a character. We've got to
yeah,
go through a fairly significant pipeline to get all of that done. And because each character moves differently and has different moves and they're weighted. So all of that when you're doing that in 2D hand drawn has to be perfect from the beginning. Otherwise, when you get to the end of the process and it doesn't work, there is no back to the drawing board
yeah,
unless you're willing to spend 20 or 30 grand,
yeah.
So everything's got to be this type of game has to be meticulously planned from day one. Otherwise, things go off the rails quite quickly, which is why we started this process well before we even announced it to the fan base because we wanted to make sure that we had everything locked down.
So could Evil Ernie end up being a playable character at some point?
Well, Evil Ernie is interesting because Coffin don't have the rights to that character anymore.
Oh no.
So we would have to go to a third party, and that could get quite difficult. But there is, I don't know if you've seen the Kickstarter stretch goals, but there is one in there for Brian Pulido to become a playable character.
Oh,
We're not
that's
going to meet
cool.
it, but that is an option. If fans really dug in deep, they'll be able to see him as a playable character. So yeah, we want to do as much as we possibly can with this game. We're very cautious that we don't overpromise with the more surface level stuff, we want to make sure the combat and mechanics are as locked down and awesome as they possibly can be. Because especially with sword combat,
Mhm.
there is a lot to take in. And Lady Death has multiple magic powers as well with the swords and even with her own spells and things like that. So um her own powers, there's just so much. It was quite interesting going into this game because, normally we're trying to fish around for how you would integrate the game into a property like this, but with Lady Death, it was the opposite. It's like, what do we have to get rid of? What do we have to omit? Because
Yeah.
it was like a banquet.
So, anytime in the future, do you think there might be any kind of maybe multiplayer kind of add on to it or anything where
We'd
different?
love to do online multiplayer. Two-player couch co-op has been unlocked in the funding, so that will definitely be part of the game. So the second character is Ravenheart. And he was a former love interest of Lady Death in the books, and he passed away in the story, and he's resurrected in this in our game, and the reason for that resurrection is a critical part of the story, so I can't really give more away, but two-player couch co-op definitely in there. Would love to do four-player, or at least four-player online would be awesome, but at this stage we're keeping it simple. And we'll see how once we release the trailer and the first gameplay footage at the end of this year, we'll see what sort of traction we can get from that. And I'd love the fans to see if they can um, get involved in helping us reach a few of those other stretch goals.
So, have you shown any? What was the reception like? Did you get to show any of the footage of the game at the Lady Death Con?
No, we had even less than we've had in the Kickstarter at the Lady Death Con. We like I said before, with this type of game, it's the devil part of the pun. The devil is in the detail early on. So gameplay footage for us will be ready sort of October, November, and then we'll be doing a teaser trailer with the gameplay footage before Christmas.
Okay.
That's when the fan base will see full gameplay footage. At this stage, we've kept everything pretty locked down. Um, we've got heaps of updates coming with the actual animations, both enemy and Lady Death character animations. So players will be able to see coming to, obviously backers, I should say, will be able to see the game coming together over the next few months. But at this stage, where the core focus has been on um, the type of combat that Lady Death would be doing, the story in of itself, and getting the visual aesthetic locked down because that's the crucial part at this stage.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at everything here on there's quite a lengthy Kickstarter here about everything. I'm trying to think of all the things I want to ask you about it. What
This
is
is our
the
first Kickstarter, so we weren't quite sure like what is lengthy. We looked at other campaigns and some of them were longer than ours, and we thought, oh, this is too short.
Yeah.
But then
Oh,
people have kind of said, it's got some substance to it.
I've done a Kickstarter too, and it is not, and it is a stressful thing to go through as a
Oh,
Kickstarter.
yeah.
But yeah, I was looking at the Art of Play website the other day, and just looking at the titles that you guys have worked on, and you have such an amazing, uh, stable of things that you've worked on. Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Invader Zim, Star Wars Rebels, of course, SpongeBob. There's so much stuff here. So this isn't just, if you're listening to this isn't just a startup a video game company. I mean, these guys have a pedigree of working on stuff.
Oh, cheers, man. Yeah, we started off way back in the early 2000s doing flash games for LucasArts during the Clone Wars launch. And then Disney took over LucasArts and basically shut it down. And we went on to work with Hasbro on all their Transformers online material. So from there, Nickelodeon picked us up and asked us to do a couple of games. And when they did really well, they said, "Would you like to start a year contract with us?" And so we, what we thought was going to be a year turned out to be 10. We've done 10 years of games for Nickelodeon. And of course, then you become part of the Viacom family, and our games consistently did really well for them. So we got a chance to then work with the Sony animation team and the Paramount Pictures team. And these games were small comparison to console games, but still, the processes were exactly the same. There's just everything was truncated. So you'd have to pitch the idea for the game. You'd have to do all the animation. What they would supply you was always inferior. So you would go and redo all the assets yourself to make them work within the game context. Then you would do the alpha, beta builds. You'd do a gold master. That would then go off and get kid tested. So they just bring a bunch of kids into a room and get them to go to town on your game. You get that feedback. You'd have to pick and choose what you could actually accomplish with their feedback before the deadline. Then you'd release the
Mm.
game, and you'd move on to the next one. So it's kind of fun in the sense that we were doing so many different games over the course of 10 years. It was never a dull moment, but yeah, it was quite stressful. And now it's a different kind of stress because these projects run for a couple of years, but uh, we're still squeezing a lot of work into that same time period.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Phantom game too, and those of you who are comic book fans, and especially superhero fans in the '90s. I don't know if everybody remembers the Billy Zane Phantom movie that was released.
Absolute classic.
Yeah, back in the '90s. He's basically kind of one of the very first superheroes. Really, I mean, he was a started out as
Yeah.
I think a newspaper strip back in like the '20s or '30s, something like that.
Yeah, so next year Phantom is 90.
Wow.
Um, so that's the 90th anniversary. So we just finished working on our 10th year for Nickelodeon, and they just merged with CBS. And much like Disney, when Disney took over LucasArts, the first thing they did was shut down the online gaming sphere that Nickelodeon was running across 13 countries. So we went from doing at least a dozen games a year to nothing. And then the pandemic hit, and all these tech companies were doing great, but because of the worst time possible for us, we had nothing on our plate.
Hmm.
And so I said to Billy, our lead developer, I said, it's time to start thinking about the games we want to make rather than just what's been landing on our laps for the last decade. And I was up late one night watching YouTube reviews, and I saw that the NECA Toys had brought out a range for the Phantom and for Defenders of the Earth. And all these young people were checking out the Phantom and saying, "Oh, I love the look of this character. He looks so awesome. I don't know who he is. I'm going to read up about him." And so that got me inspired to think, okay, the Phantom is still making he's still making some waves. I'm going to reach out to King Feature Syndicate out of the blue and see if there's a possibility of working with them. So I sent them just a general document of who we were and all that sort of stuff. And within about 3 hours of sending it, I got a response back. And they said, sure, we'd love to see more. And I didn't have any more. So I frantically put together a 10-page pitch deck over the course of 3 or 4 days and sent that over to them. And luckily, it sort of resonated with them. They were just starting to transfer those properties into a new digital space. And we were, like you were saying before, our back catalogue of commercial work was enough for them to at least start negotiations with us. And the Phantom, for me personally, coming from Australia, my Phantom is huge here. It was the first comic book I ever read. I mean, I didn't even know Marvel and DC existed. The Phantom was the comic book that I had, and
Yeah.
I had a stack of them that my dad left for me in my room one day, and they were his comics, so like a hand-me-down sort of thing. And it wasn't until the Tim Burton 1989 Batman that I actually realized there was a whole universe out there of comics and characters and things like that. So I had a very kind of limited perspective as a young kid, up until the age of 8 or 9, and it was just the Phantom. So this was all the sorts of stuff that I'd put in the pitch, and I understood the character and the stories and all that sort of stuff. And it took us a year going back and forth with King Features to negotiate the contract. And a lot of that was the fact they'd never done anything like this before, um, and we were just moving to the console space ourselves, so it was like two amateurs, so to speak, or two newbies working together on this. But it worked out really well because I started reaching out to comic book illustrators and saying to them, "Hey, like, why aren't you doing more in the gaming space? You need to come and work on my team, and we'll get you trained up in doing things like animation and I mean, a lot of comic book artists will draw something and they'll draw the background, but there's nothing behind the character.
Mm.
So just simple things like that of getting artists to understand that in video games, you got to draw all the layers, right? You
Yeah.
can't just be drawing around things.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to put together a team that knew what they were doing in their medium and then kind of upskill them into doing game stuff. And that worked out so well with the fans. And we took the initial 3 level demo back to King Features in New York just after I met with Brian last year. And they absolutely loved it and went really, really well. And all the promotional work we've done around the fans and they said was fantastic. And I think it reinvigorated them for what the potential that the brand has. And so now we're 13 out of 15 levels are complete. We're doing a new trailer in June. Sorry, 1st of July, the new trailer drops, and then we're launching the digital version of the game just before Christmas, hopefully. Fingers crossed, approvals and everything go to plan. That's when we want to launch. So the same team for the Phantom are moving on to Lady Death now because the Phantom is just in production in terms of dev, and there's a little bit of visual stuff, but most of the visual stuff is done and locked down. So that team is now moving over to Lady Death, and then once the visuals are done with Lady Death, my dev team will kick in, and so we're sort of we're stepping it out, so to speak. But the Phantom for us is it's kind of worked out perfectly. The fan base had no idea who we were, and we've had to build up a solid communication with them and to let them know that we're serious about this and we're not just taking the property for a ride. And it's worked out really well. The fan base are digging what we've done so far, and again, it's they could have given it to a bigger studio and done more of a AAA type thing, but I think they've respected the kind of indie space that we're kind of sitting in at the moment, and it kind of works really well.
Well, I think indie games are going to kind of have their another day in the sun here soon because it seems like with
Oh
the
yeah,
AAA studios, there's a lot of layoffs and closings and stuff just because it's just not sustainable.
no, it's not sustainable, and the track record they have so far. I mean, they'd have to do a decade worth of repairing it for the fans to be truly behind them again.
Yeah.
Um, And it's not easy for indie studios either. I mean, just to get a few $100,000 worth of funding, and particularly at this particular juncture in the physical versus digital space that we've got at the moment, a lot of publishers will happily and gladly back you from a digital perspective. But when you say, "Oh, I've got a fan base, a really dedicated fan base, and a physical release is necessary," then your choice of publishers goes
Mm.
down to like one out of 10.
Yeah.
Um, so with us, we're trying to sort of capture that collectability market, and because people who like to read comics, that there's a beautiful tactile sensation to reading an actual comic book,
Hmm.
and we want some of that at least to translate to the gaming side. Whether it's opening a box and seeing a manual in there, like it's
Oh,
1993
you're
again.
speaking my
Um,
language now. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here about someone who just loves physical media. Like I want the physical thing in my hands. I want the instruction manuals. I want to just look
yeah,
at it and see it.
yeah, and that's like I don't think that should be classed as strange or weird or
No.
different. I think that should be the mainstay of what
Yeah.
gaming, because it's all the prices of the cartridge-based games have gone through the roof for that very reason. There is nothing more satisfying than yanking a box off the shelf and slamming it into your console, turning it on, and it's instantly there. No one's pestering you to download anything. No one's making you spend $15 on a skin for your character. The game is the game.
Hmm.
And we want to get as close to that as possible with Lady Death and the Phantom. Um, and that might just be me being a curmudgeony old man, but at the same time, uh, I dare anyone to try and prove me wrong that still isn't a great feeling.
Yeah, I'm
It
right there
it
with
doesn't
you.
mean it has to be for everyone, but I think if you have come from a background where it is important to look at something on the shelf and admire it for its full package, it's not just the sprites on the screen, it's how does the cover art look and how does it feel holding that little the little instruction booklet. I mean, it's all a big part of what I grew up with, so I'm sticking to it.
And I'm looking at some of the screenshots here. I'm looking at the actual it's the phantomgame.com and you can see some of the screenshots and everything here and it looks and it looks incredible. I mean, it looks like a comic book come to life, and I can't wait to play these games.
We had some interesting feedback from other studios when we launched the trailer. They said, "Are you guys really hand drawing everything?" And we said, "Yeah, we're hand drawing everything." Because I think there's just been this general wave of trying to produce assets the quickest and cheapest way possible. I totally get it from a budgeting perspective, but at some point you got to step back and say, right, what does it really mean to make a video game? And for us, for me personally, coming from a 2D illustration animation background, art is important to me. It's
Mm.
incredibly important to me. It's not just a part of the game, it's a big part. And when I spoke to Anthony Spay, when I was pitching all this stuff to Brian and to King Feature Syndicate, I'm saying what I'm saying now to you is what I'm saying to them. And I think that's really resonated. People want to see a bunch of crazy maniacs in the gaming studio feverishly doing frame by frame animation. You know, it just feels like the effort is being put in. There's a certain love that I want people to feel that's being put into these games.
Well, I think you got. I can feel the passion about these projects just pouring off of you, and it makes me
Thanks, man. It's
excited.
only 11:30 a.m.
Yeah,
too. You know,
and it makes me
come and talk to me
excited.
when it's like midnight, and
I
I've
mean,
got my night owl
I,
attitude going.
yeah, I mean, I was already excited about these projects when you brought them to my attention, and now after talking to you, like I can't wait to play these games because I miss feeling like the people that make the games are excited about the games they're making, and it just
Yeah.
feels fresh. You know, it feels nice.
Well, I think there was a turning point for me when I played the latest Hellboy game, and it just didn't feel like anything to me. It felt like just like an
Mm,
open world, 3D adventure that I'd played a million times before. And that's not to say that we're um, rewriting any of the playbook on side-scrolling beat 'em ups, but I think if you're going to keep the mechanics simple, then you want to express the level of excitement you have for the character and for the game in other ways. And the big way for us is visually. So we want the mechanics to be super sound, but we also want to make sure the visuals back it up. And I think it's a very hard balance to find in video game design because developers are developers and designers. There's always push and pull. And then you've got, people breathing over your shoulders from licenses and things like that. But having said all that, our goal is to find that niche in the market where, we're the sort of farmers market to the big supermarkets. We're little guys out the back, and our produce is good, and it's we're doing it because we love it. We're not
mm.
doing it because we want to have 400% markup on everything. I'm sure that'd be nice, but we're doing it because we love it. We want that to show through on the game.
Well, it just feels very punk rock to me, and I'm that
I
punk rock
appreciate that,
kid.
man. That's
So
why I wear black every day.
yeah.
Got to hold on to some element of my youth.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about the projects and everything. Is there anything you want to let everybody know before we let you go here today?
Yeah, we've got 8 days or so left on the Kickstarter. Jump on there. We've got tiers for everyone. If you're a digital fan and you just want something digital, that's awesome. We've got a Shelf Queen tier, which will give you a box with a digital code in it, just in case you're halfway there. And then we've got a bunch of different physical tiers with some really cool artists from the Lady Death cover artist catalog. Um, and each one's unique. All this is limited stuff too. When the actual retail version of the game comes out, it won't be any of this multiple covers and things like that. So jump on there, support us. We'd love to take this game to the next level. And yeah, ladydeathgame.com as well. Check that out, sign up, and you'll be hopefully hearing from us.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put all these links in the show notes. So if you're interested, if you want to go check everything out, I'll have all the links in there. Thank you so much, Ash, for hanging out with us this week. And
Appreciate it, Jason.
we'll have to have you back on again when the games are released and see
Yeah, let's
what's
do
going on
something around
then.
the trailer launch at the end of the year. That'd be awesome.
Maybe we can get, I don't know, maybe we get some people in the community to maybe throw their 2 cents in and see what they think about the games and everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, it's been 99% positive so far. So I'm hoping to keep that ratio
Yeah.
relatively good.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us, everybody. If you want to follow us, just go to linktree/nerdcaveretro, or you can just go to nerdcaveretro.com. That'll take you straight to the Linktree, and everywhere you need to go, where you can follow us and all that good stuff. Go support Art of Play Games and their Lady Death Kickstarter. All that stuff's going to be in the show notes. So thank you all for hanging out with us, and we'll see you right here next week.
Thanks, everyone.